and showed everything there. But
Okay. I'll take it on.
We're not doing an executive session anyway, so we won't have to meet it.
Yes, fine. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this special meeting of the Cemetery Board. We have just a couple things on the agenda. We have no minutes to go over, and we're going to have no preliminaries, so let's get right down to it.
Okay. So, Vale Cemetery. We'll start with Vale?
Start with Vale.
Okay, so then everybody can get out of here after that. We can, so essentially Vale Cemetery, I'll do this, but we've got 2 representatives from Vale Cemetery here and 2 representatives from Monolith Solar.
On the line?
Yeah, no.
Oh,
Right here.
They're all here.
I'm glad you're here.
I will give you our overview of the project and why we on balance think it's a good idea. And I thought Chris was howling in protest. And then if these guys have anything to add, Tony, I can answer most, but not all of the questions you sent. They could probably answer the rest. Mr. Zuckerman is Zuckerman, right? Yeah. Okay, who's a new board member of the Vale Cemetery, is involved with other not-for-profits in the area who have worked with Monolith Solar to do solar projects on their roofs. The cemetery has, I think, 8 cleared acres that are unsold that it's currently selling only 6 graves a year and isn't going to need this for a long period of time. One chunk of that land is directly opposite the cemetery's community farm. They have a community farm on cemetery land where local folks, I think it's mostly kids, if I remember right, Bernie, but other people do come in and grow things, as surrounded by a chain link fence. So that particular section of the cemetery doesn't look very cemetery, as it were, already.
Bruce, is this the portion we're talking about?
Let me see. No.
That's the other application.
No.
I'm saying, wow.
No, I have
Okay,
photos of it. I forgot to print them out of the community garden so you can get a sense that there's this fence in this area with a chain link fence right across from where they want to put the panels. Right. So I got the idea. Why don't we see if we can put some panels? By the way, this is an idea that the division has been exploring with solar providers and cemeteries for pretty much since I started here 4 years ago. There's been a project. There's a very large project at a Catholic cemetery in Suffolk County. But until now, what I've been told every time we've tried to pursue this with the cemetery, working with them and the partners and what have you, is that either the electrical rates aren't good enough, or there's at least 7 cleared acres that are flat. This one is effectively the project's going to use between about 1.5 and 2 acres of land, even though the panels will only cover 5,400 square feet because it's going to take out that chunk. And the idea is these panels will be in an area. The cemetery kind of narrows. It's the larger sort of stately rural cemetery part of the cemetery is east of the area we're talking about. You know, with the winding paths and the stately, the big headstones and all that. The cemetery then narrows because the Catholic cemetery intrudes a bit on one side, and there's a row of houses that they're completely blocked off by trees, but they do narrow the cemetery at that point on the other side. And then as you approach Brandywine Ave, the side street, it widens again. The place that they want to put this, I don't know how clear this is from the map that I circulated, but the place they want to put this is in that sort of neck that connects those 2 pieces. Essentially, what it will look like, and one of the reasons I didn't have a problem with this aesthetically, is what it will look like is you'll have, cemetery on one side, cemetery on the other side, and effectively this section will be this road connecting the 2 that will have non-traditional cemetery uses on both sides. But it won't be like smack in the middle of the developed graves areas. And it's not really, to answer one of your questions from today, Tony, it's not really where they're selling. Where they're going to be selling is starting, if you guys have the map in front of you, they're going to be selling starting at that oval and continuing, I guess I misspoke as east and west. I meant west before, and now I'm going to mean the real east. continuing east towards Brandywine Avenue is where they're really going to be selling. Paul, if you want to, it's this essentially where they're going to be selling, not right up against here, although theoretically they're selling there too. And then by this, Tony, I was pointing to the two chunks adjoining Brandywine Ave and the Oval. So it is true the project will be visible from those areas. They're not fencing it off. I'm not sure that fencing it off would be aesthetically more pleasing than unfenced, but it's not going to be like right on top of the areas where they're selling either.
Is there any rationale for a fence other than
I'm told that
safety or?
I'm told that there's no need to fence these off, and that they aren't typically fenced off.
Okay.
That's what I had from back and forth with the providers. The only one of these projects that I've seen up close, because I made a wrong turn into it once, is the one at the Catholic Cemetery in Suffolk County, and that is a whole different ball game. It's this major installation with big fences and gates and stuff like that. But that's, I mean, I don't know whether there's like high power transmission equipment there as well, and that's why they have the fence or what have you. It looks totally different from what they're proposing here. I think Len is in the field, but Mike and I both. Mike is here, and Mike. I thought Mike was there. Mike's in our Syracuse office, and both Mike and I have been to the site.
Can I follow up on a fencing question?
Sure.
Obviously, my role here is to make sure that there's no risk to public health and safety.
Right.
And I got this application midweek, so I had very limited time to read it thoroughly.
We were going
or to review.
My bad, but we were going back and forth and getting all the
Or
information.
to review it with the folks in my department. So I very quickly did some internet research. The National Electric Code has mandatory requirements for the electrical safety of solar PV arrays. To protect against intruders, Article 690 of the National Electric Code covers the safety standards for solar PV installation and requires that conductors installed as part of the solar PV be not readily accessible, in their words. With a large-scale ground-mounted array, a fence is typically installed around the system to prevent intruders. Some communities have solar PV or signage bylaws that require identification of the system owner and 24-hour emergency contact information. I do notice in the information that you provided that at the end of Elmer Avenue, there's a house very close to these arrays.
I think the appearance is a little deceiving there, but yeah, it's, I don't think it's as close as it looks.
But also there is a row of houses along Stanford Avenue that abuts the installation as I see it.
I guess I should probably defer to ask the solar folks this, but my understanding is there are certain components of this that are.
There's a fence all around the cemetery. So those
Cemetery itself
homes,
is fenced.
there's a fence all along there.
But that's not necessarily
This is-
pertinent to.
Well, it's
access
pertinent to the
solar
homes.
array.
The homes
Right,
are
they-
fenced
yeah.
away from.
And they're also up on basically a hill.
Right, but hi there, would you mind identifying yourselves for us?
Absolutely. Lindsay McIntyre, Monolith Solar. So the conductors on the system, the inverters, those will be put behind a fence and protected. The panels themselves, though, there's really nothing anyone could get into there that would cause them harm. So the inverters that are converting that current from DC power, direct current, to AC, those will be protected. And those are just really small devices that will sit right behind the panels.
So a child touching a panel is not an issue?
Not gonna harm them whatsoever.
All right, so I have no idea what these are.
Right.
The inductors, they're going to be fenced, but they're small. In
Right,
other
they're
words, we have
small.
representations of what this is going to look like. But so the inductors are like underneath
Right behind the array. And also, just to touch base on the NEC code and what they're referring to. So large solar installations are 4,000 square feet or greater, so that would be a megawatt system, which is what you were referring to down in Suffolk County. It's a large installation, whereas this is much smaller. It's about 1/10 of the size of that.
So the NEC code would not pertain?
Right, because it's smaller, it's under 4,000 square feet.
Do you have similar setups elsewhere in the state?
We do, especially in Schenectady County. So we actually have an agreement with the county to provide all of their power through these solar systems. So Hetcheltown Road, we have a site on Hetcheltown Road, which is a county site. And I can send you guys the addresses to look at some of our other sites.
Are they similar in size?
A little bit larger,
A
actually.
little bit larger? They have fences?
No fences.
Okay.
No.
You mentioned something that we actually had some conversation about supplying power.
Right.
One of the issues, Bernie, which I think maybe we'll chat about, is the rate that's being paid. And it's $2,000 a year plus the cost of living increase, if you will, whatever that is, 1.75, with a $15,000 signing bonus, which, by the way, we have to adjust the date in the contract. But anyway, is there any possibility of supplying the cemetery with power or an in-kind?
No, so the previous contracts that have been installed, like with Schenectady County, for example, they signed up with us about 3 years ago when incentives with New York State were much higher. So right now, it doesn't behoove us to sell the cemetery this power because they didn't get submitted at a time when these incentives were in existence.
So the New York State was providing incentives to
Exactly. The county's projects, right?
to Monolith or to
Monolith.
Monolith directly, so they were essentially underwriting the cost.
Exactly. Yep.
That's it.
And because these were signed years ago when this was in effect and are being grandfathered in, that's why the program works to sell it to these municipalities that have agreements in existence with us. If we were to submit Vale Cemetery into this program, it just doesn't, the cash flow doesn't work out for us to sell the power currently.
I wanted to just address the question you guys had about the houses there. I mean, Bernie, you can confirm this, but there's a pretty decent row of trees there separate along the fence, separating the houses from this. They're not, unless they're really peering very carefully through their branches, they're not even going to see it. What kind of trees are they?
Arborvitaes, pretty dense.
Evergreen.
Hi there, Bernie, we know you, but could you identify yourself for the record?
I'm Vice President of the Board of Vale, President of Vale Cemetery Preservation, with a 501c3 for.
Bernie McAvoy, for
Yes.
the record.
Thank you.
First to be reading of the honor introductions.
Oh, yeah,
You did not
extraordinary being the cemetery board, I dispense with everything. Hello, everybody, Dan Shapiro, I'm Secretary of State, was out as designated chair.
Paul Ambrose representing Commissioner Howard Zucker of the Department of Health.
And Christopher Wiles representing Attorney General Eric Schneider.
Tony?
Tony Melillo, counsel to the cemetery board.
Louis Polishuk, Director, Cemeteries.
Chester Buckowitz, Assistant Director, Division of Cemeteries.
Jacqueline Frechette, Secretary, Division of Cemeteries.
Nothing like interrupting the flow. Anyway, all right. So, yeah.
Could I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I would just suggest that we sort of break the concern, whatever questions you guys have down into 3 subjects, so we keep this in a little bit of an orderly fashion. One would be sort of, what we've been talking now, operational issues. Then if you have questions about finances, we can talk about finances. And then, Tony, if you have stuff that's really sort of legal in nature, we can do that. Just so that we don't have this thing and that thing and the other thing.
I also have I have community and landholder issues.
I would put that together in the first category.
Okay. So what's your first category?
Just sort of operational, physical. The piece that would normally be covered in an investigator's report.
So I'd like to know if there's been any outreach to the community, any outreach to your lot holders in terms of what they think about this project.
When we hold a lot owners meeting each year and run legal notices, we get one or no lot owner
Understand.
input. We do send out a newsletter twice a year to lot owners, mostly soliciting contributions for the restoration, but telling them of all the events. Vale was started in 1857, so when you have a tipped over tombstone, you try and find the owner, there's nobody left. 200 years ago, a family bought the.
Was this included in the recent newsletter that you had online?
We weren't involved in this when the Memorial Day newsletter went out in April. It will be in the one that goes out at Thanksgiving time for the Christmas newsletter.
What municipal approvals are attached to this after? Were we to grant this, what would be your next steps?
Yes, so we have to be issued approval from utilities, so National Grid, and also the municipality would have to issue us a building permit. So that's something that Monolith would retrieve.
Yes, just a building permit.
Yeah.
I don't know if what this counts for, but point out that Mr. Zuckerman's congregation, Gates of Heaven, in Schenectady or Rotterdam?
No, it's actually half Schenectady, half Niskuna. Goes right through our building.
Okay, whatever. Their synagogue has recently purchased 100 grave section.
we're in the process.
of purchasing 100 grave section in one of the area, not immediately adjacent, but one of the areas closest to the project. The corner area on Brandywine Ave. So it's not the closest, but the oval would probably be closer. And obviously, they don't have a problem with it because he's here today. That doesn't necessarily prove that everyone's fine. I guess one other question I have for Bernie is, in this area, in the graves that are closest to the installation, because I know there's a couple at the very end beyond where the installation is, and I know that there's a couple at the very beginning of it. There's some. Do they, what kind of visitation do you get? I mean, are these ones that are recent? Do you ever see anyone on any of those? That sort of, because people who are in the other part of the cemetery to the west aren't gonna have the faintest idea this is there. But the ones who are closest might,
Yeah. There are 3 graves to the left, to the north of the circle. That's all there is in that whole GN section. Those are the only graves in the GN section. There are about 3. I do occasionally see people come in, and we take good care of the shrubbery there, and we weed whack around their stones.
So, I'm sorry to harp this, but going back, with respect to the community at large, respect to the community at large, all right? You are bumping up against, residential area there, obviously. Has there been any outreach at all to folks there?
No.
I should add, this also abuts property to St. John's Cemetery. So they're a neighbor. And to the extent that a major renovation application requires us to examine adverse impact on the community, I would add St. John's Cemetery as community, which holds the whole.
to be fair on that, the community garden is actually what's up against St. John's. St. John's is separated from this installation by the chain link fence and farm setup. So as the crow flies, it's a relatively close part of the cemetery. It would be nice to see it from St. John's Cemetery because there's a farm in the way. And more importantly, there's a chain link fence around the farm that's in the way.
And can I just add one thing as well? So when we go to get that building permit through the planning board, they do have to they send out a letter to the local community as well. So they're going to be touching base with the property owners that are along that site.
But tell me if I'm wrong, because I'd love to be wrong, all right? But a building permit is going to be purely based on its compliance with the relevant building code, all right?
Right, but they will have an open session, so if anyone comes out
But they don't have discretion to deny you if you comply with the building, unless there's a variance, all
Right,
right? They have no
correct.
discretion to, notwithstanding any community dissatisfaction whatsoever.
Correct.
Okay, so that's my problem. Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna resolve it with that, it'd be great. If the municipality with that permitted.
Right. If we go up for a variance for this
Do you need a
site,
variance for this?
we might need a variance, so I don't have a firm answer on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It adheres to the zoning code, not the building code.
Oh, for a building permit, you're going, it's building code, right? For zoning, they need a variance, absolutely, either the zoning, or if it's a building permit and they need a variance on the building code.
All right.
You know the deal.
Separate
I know
it.
you do. Okay, so that, I'm just gonna note that as an issue. We'll keep plowing through.
I do want the board to return to the issue of interference with existing graves and issue of interference with lots appropriate for cemetery purpose. Part of the concern I have is, despite the fact that we've had communications with Monolith, it's still not completely clear what the boundaries are, where these panels are going to be. Some of the images show the panels ending well before the road splits, but then you have this image where you have the path split and it's beyond the split. And that's actually where you've told us you're putting graves. So it looks like the panels are right over where you plan on putting graves in, at least in this image. So there's no consistency among the images, so it's hard for me to come to a conclusion as to whether this is graves. And there are graves in this image. I don't know if they're yours or St. John's. Below that oval?
That's not St. John's, that's not.
That's yours?
That's still them.
Right here.
You can see the fence of St. John's on the,
I assume, are those your headstones?
You're on the wrong side. The system is over here. This is on the other side.
Well, I understand that, but the question is, if visitors are coming to visit these graves,
Right.
are they gonna see this? Because this is right on top of that, right?
but we have another rendering that shows it further over, which would, if that's the correct placement, would obviously be less trouble.
But this is, all right, so on your map, this is BN, right? And you do have graves in headstone BN.
Right.
And in GN, this is leaking into GN as well, right? Do you have any graves or headstones in GN yet? So based on this, it's like pretty much on top of it.
The one, I know the one person's happens to work that has the grave there, the burial for her son that was buried.
So close.
And I can tell you that she has no problem. We talked about it. She happens to be an employee of
But I
ours.
think it is important that we pin down exactly where this,
Yeah.
because my impression from when I visited the site was that, Tony, it was in the further away position and not the closer position that you're pointing to now.
Right.
And that I would, if it were where you were saying, I probably would feel differently. Okay.
I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean,
As to
we've
that.
got a map here, we've got that
Right,
here.
yeah, so the map that, you guys have this map in front of you?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so this is the design that would be submitted to National Grid and the building department and whatnot, so this is what you should go off of.
Because we saw a different rendering that had
Right,
it a little further
which
over.
I just wanted to put together a mock-up for you, so you could see what they look like at
The
a
good map.
table.
Yeah.
Because the farther they are away from that oval,
Right.
the happier we're gonna be.
And we want them further away from that as well, because they're shaded, so.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you guys hear this?
Right.
So
I'm sorry.
apparently, the tail end of where the map is.
I tell you what, let's hold up for 1 minute.
Is that,
Yeah.
so we could easily shift.
I want to get back on the same page here.
No, they want to.
We're all having different conversations.
So you-
Right, we can easily
this
shift.
oval is this oval. GN is where we have some graves. This shows the panels.
I guess the old fashioned map.
That is not what I saw.
Okay, so now, just to make sure we're on the same page, literally, is this rendering? the rendering that's intended?
So what we have meeting said is over, so we can easily fill in space.
Okay, so the issue was you did this for a rendering, but this isn't necessarily what it's going to be.
Right.
All right, so this is a rendering, apparently. I'm just going to recapitulate what you just told me. So that the solar array, which seems to encroach on G, where sales are going to be made, actually can be moved back, because this is just a rendering. There's a gap there, and this can move all the way back to fill in the gap. And then perhaps you don't have a contract. It's still an issue. We're gonna have to nail this down in any event.
Well, based on what you're talking about moving back is in fact where I thought it was in the first
where I
place
thought
when
it
I
was.
went to see, when I was actually physically at the
Okay.
cemetery.
All right, so if it's consistent with that, we're not gonna have a problem, but we have to keep it, right? Is that correct, Louis?
I don't have a problem with it. I can't say what you guys have a
Well,
problem
it's
with.
the encroachment, I understand the
Yeah,
encroachment.
I mean, you're not physically encroaching, and it wouldn't be nearly as visible as if it were where Tony's pointing out on the map. Crazy, if it were where Tony were pointing out on the map, it would actually be on top of that one grave we were talking about.
Right.
Because there is that one grave there at the edge.
All right. Let's move on to the next issue.
Well, assuming we're ready to, any questions about
Yeah.
the money piece of this?
Oh, I don't need the next, I don't,
Oh,
I think there are a few issues.
on this piece still? Okay, fine.
Yeah. I guess the money issue. So,
That's what I meant.
so Vail is going to be getting, if you amortize $15,000, it's a signing bonus over 20 years, about $2,700. Let's add another 100 for, $2,800 a year.
Monolith did a calculation where if you, with the escalator for each year, for
Yeah.
the monthly, for the annual
Right.
payment, it comes to about 62 grand and change over 20 years.
Okay,
Which if you didn't escalate it, it comes to like 5 grand.
okay.
Years.
So,
So,
3,000 a year.
yeah,
What-
more or less, just
May I
about.
explain, first of all, from a financial point of view? My background, financial planning. My partner and I have a wholesale insurance brokerage. We advise the advisors. We sell nothing to the public. We're into life and health and group insurance. So we do some financial planning with people. You have to understand, we are not selling the grave sites. So we have the ability to go back in at the end of 20 years and take this down, and we still have the land. If you look at it from a financial point of view, our perpetual care fund, and this money will all go into perpetual care.
Permanent thing.
The permanent, right, we call it perpetual care at our cemetery, at the temple. Last year, our rate of return was 10.3%. If you use the rule of 72, you divide the interest rate into 72, that will tell you the number of years that money will double. So you have $15,000 coming in. 10.3 into 72 is roughly 7 years. That means, and we're only keeping the money there, the 15,000 in 7 years becomes 30,000. The next 7 years, which would be 14 years into the plan, the 30 becomes 60,000, and the last 7 years, roughly the 21st year, makes it a double 60 is $120,000 that Vail Cemetery is going to receive in order to keep the cemetery going. That doesn't include the additional money that would be coming in. At $2,000 a year over 20 years, if you take the halfway point, 10 years, you've got $20,000 that went in 10 years, which again, in 10 more years, that 20,000 is gonna double. So you add that to the 120, and we're up well over $150,000. If in fact we haven't sold all the plots, and as we say in Yiddish, alavai, should only happen that we're able to sell those plots, and I doubt we will, we can renegotiate and get whatever rate it's gonna be at that time, or we tell them
At what point?
at the end of 20 years.
Actually, the contract is currently set forth, provides exclusive discretion for renewal with Monolith.
Well, they've
Which is something
already
we've talked to-
represented
which
they're
is
willing
something
to
we've
make
talked
it.
about.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and Monolith
either
has said,
way
at the end of
it's
20
out.
years, we have the right to
Okay.
look at it, either buy it, at the going rate, we can actually buy it and then handle it ourselves, renegotiate whatever the rate's gonna be at that time, or we tell them to take it out. So it gives us a very large amount of money for keeping land. Another question is, well, now we don't have to cut the grass. We save a little bit on that. In checking with Clark, our superintendent, it's about 6 hours every 3 weeks they cut the grass. So figure 2 hours a week that they're doing it. The rate of pay at $12 and change an hour saves us over each year $800 and change.
But you have to cut around it, don't you?
Beg
You
pardon?
have to cut around it, don't you?
Most of it is, no, because we're also looking at, and it has nothing to do with children or anything else, planting wildflowers there for the bee population. That's a different project we have going in another section that they have because the decrease of the bee population, but that has nothing to do with the solar, other than they said, sure, we'll be happy to plant as we have on our green cemetery part, wildflowers, which will bring back butterflies and bees to help in the pollination. Different section, we're gonna hopefully have Schenectady school kids come in, learn how to do that, and Monolith has a scholarship program. Has nothing to do, and I don't wanna get the two confused, with the solar array. But from our point of view, it's a great way to have income, produce enough money to build up our care fund. And to us, it's a win-win-win situation.
it's a very minor point, but I just, you have to mow the grass, right? So you're saying you're gonna save money for mowing grass, but you still have to cut around, even if you have a garden 3 sides of the thing, right? And so you have to cut in. I mean, you're telling me you're gonna save on mowing, but don't you still have to attend to the property?
Well, we mow the other part, but again, if the people don't have to do it for 2 hours a week on the average, it gives them 2 hours to go and work in our crematorium or whatever other place.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Seelman, when Mike and I visited the site, made the same exact point that there will be a minimal decrease in grounds maintenance because there'll just be this one chunk that they're not gonna have to ride over.
Minimal is the key word.
Right, it's not a huge difference.
Because the great expense in mowing is mowing where there's headstones. This is an open field. This is up and down until you're done. No moving around.
Right, no, that's why we didn't try to factor, that's why we didn't try to,
I pursued it. but-
that's why we didn't try to factor in a number.
So,
It
let me ask
will
you
free
this.
up a little of their time to do other things, I think that's more important.
So the issue here, from my perspective, it can be resolved, all right? And I'm glad you're here to address it, is that we're taking a significant chunk of property, which ostensibly you don't need, right? We haven't laid that out for folks, but we've got many, many decades of burials. And before I go into this analysis, this land is not necessarily prime, is that correct? For sales, right? You have more prime land on either side. Okay?
I would like the president of the Vale to answer that question. From my look at the map, this is your vacant land. You have no other vacant land.
Tons of it.
Well, vacant cleared land.
Vacant cleared land that we mow, that's grass, yes, tons of it.
That you haven't sold yet?
Yes.
The areas along Brandywine Ave, those 2 sections along Brandywine Ave are larger than they look
I
on the
couldn't
map.
see any area that looked like this that was ready for graves.
The
Anywhere else in the
the
cemetery.
reason it looks that way is that it probably makes the other land just more disposed, that it's not completely free, but there are a few trees along and within the section of Brandywine Ave. There's still, most of that is empty for burial. Mike and I walked through that after we saw the piece.
All of this is this.
Well, yes.
Yes.
I consider that part and parcel of what we're looking at.
No, the solar panels are down here. This is empty, this is.
How long a road is this? I mean, how many feet are we talking about, yards?
Eighth of a mile.
That's what I was gonna say too.
It's tiny.
Hey, Chris, let's speak up for Chris to hear.
Just to be clear.
All right, yeah.
But it's about 1/4 of a mile.
So this is it. From here to here is their cleared land. This is gonna be occupied by the solar panel. So this is what they're talking about is the prime land. It's all prime land. They're taking half their prime land away with the solar panels.
So, look, how many graves have you got in cleared land that's not occupied by the solar panels?
Graves
In other words,
in cleared land?
yeah,
In basically,
I think we have
where's
like
the
a
map that had the numbers on it? Let me see this.
how many sales, how many potential sales?
Well, if you've got EN, AN, and FN, and what's left of GN, what have you got there?
We have hardly anything sold in AN.
Okay.
Over by the firehouse. About half of BN is sold. CN is an urban farm all around that.
How about EN, and GN, and FN? The stuff along the houses.
EN is
There's
where
nothing
the
at all.
temple.
EN's where the temple's
Hold it.
buying, but the
Bernie,
temple's buying it.
If you go by there, first of all, you're gonna see, and the reason, when we looked at, we are not purchasing the plots, we are purchasing the right for burial, okay? Our attorney, who used to work with the state, says that's the best way of doing it, because otherwise, we believe the the members of the synagogue have to vote on when you buy property. So we are not buying the property, it'll still be Vale's property. There's gigantic trees there. That was the first place I brought the people, because I'm on a lot of different boards, and this is a way for not-for-profits to get some money. We're looking at roofs, etc. The problem is the trees shaded, because I figured, hey, that's kind of our area, we'll get it for the synagogue. Okay, well, we can't, so we moved it down. That area, there's a gigantic swath of land there, which has got to be at least an acre, if not 2 acres. Then there's another group of trees and another swath of land, which is the same size as we're looking at, the small little piece, with the right to pick up 200 more graves.
If you add together FN,
It's gigantic.
AN, what have you got that's unsold, that's ready to be sold tomorrow? If somebody walked in and wanted to buy an infinite number of graves, what do you have in AN, EN, and FN?
And if that's an acre, it's probably 400 unsold plots there.
Okay.
BN, probably 200 unsold. CN,
Forget CN, EN, and FN.
EN only has the Muslim cemetery, all the rest is empty.
So that's how many you got there?
Well, if we figure that's an acre, and there's 800 graves per acre, probably,
Half?
yeah.
Okay, so that's 400. And then FN got a few, right?
FN is inside the circle.
So here's my point.
There's nobody in there.
Well, I have a question.
The Muslims are further down.
All right, so let's, all right, I'm gonna cut this short.
Try to get some
I'm-
perspective.
I-
One moment.
Now, Chet, hold on, Chet,
Go ahead.
hold on. All right. You've got hundreds of graves that you're saying that you have,
Right.
all right? You sell about 6 graves a year,
Yep.
so this represents, in your opinion, decades, many decades, not 30 years, not 60 years, but how many decades of sales?
When I give a tour and people say, your cemetery is all filled up, right? And I say, yeah, we've only got enough land for 200 more years of burials. If people continue getting cremated at the rate they're down, we're good for about 600 or 800 years.
So now,
We got a real,
right, so, obviously, you paid attention to this project, right?
Right.
This land is no more or no less prime than the land, the other land that you have for sale in your improvement?
I think right at Brandywine is more desirable because there's traffic going by and the rest of it.
I mean, I would actually agree with that. I know that we've had the experience with urban cemeteries where, you know, in the old days, being along the fence was not considered desirable. Nowadays, when you're in a neighborhood where people are local and they like to walk, having stuff that's really close to the fence is actually more desirable because you can see your relative's grave without even entering the cemetery. So, and plus those areas have more trees. The trees in this section are only up against the houses. There's really not much else there. I think it's aesthetically more pleasing. And you don't have the community farm across from it.
So if I may. My only point in raising this was, because from the way it was described, it sounded like there's a whole nother parcel somewhere off the cemetery that is available for graves. There isn't. It's this strip of land. Let me finish. It's this strip of land and nothing else. So a chunk of it's going to be taken up by the solar panels themselves. The rest of it, which is east, is going to be in full view of the solar panels. It's going to be impacted, the sales and burials are going to be impacted by the view of the solar panels. There is no land where they're selling graves that isn't going to be
That's
impacted by
not
the solar panels.
exactly true. Once you get section AN, pretty much completely out of view of the solar panels because it's across from the oval, which has some trees in it, and it's just physically far enough that you're not really going to see them. Section EN, at least a piece of it on Brandywine Avenue, is going to be far enough that while you don't have the same level of visual impediments, you're not going to really see them either. So I would say of the inventory that's left after this transaction, at least half of it is not in view, is not reasonably speaking in view of the panels at all.
There's another point.
There's another chunk that is.
Let me
There's a
just ask Bernie, is that correct? I have Lewis arguing your case.
Right.
But is that correct?
Let me tell it from a religious point of view. The question that our rabbi, Matt Cutler, had was, can you see the crosses from there? Okay? Same question you're asking, except ours is a religious point. No, you cannot, because there is a stand of very large trees that divide the lots there.
If I
You look
remember,
at it.
there's also a tiny bit of a slope heading
Well,
up
yes,
into the cemetery.
you know, and so the rabbi had no problem with it. To talk about being more valuable, it is more valuable at least to the Jewish, people of Jewish faith, because those that are Kohanim, the high priest, are not allowed to go into a cemetery. So it's great that they can walk along the fence and be able to see their family without entering. So it's a very interesting, from a religious point of view, how we're looking at it. So from our point of view, it's a very valuable area for burial. Our cemetery happens to be a little bit older than Vale. Ours is 1854. We're running out of space, and that's why we're looking to buy. And there's plenty of plots there, and the other
By where?
synagogues are looking to look
So
at Vale.
they have their own synagogue cemetery. They're going to reserve graves in
Oh.
one of Vale's
Right.
sections.
You're not talking about buying land.
No, we're buying the right, as I keep saying, because the attorney tells me I gotta say it this way, the right of burial.
They're specifically not buying.
How much would you pay for the swath of land that we're talking about for the
We
solar
already
panels?
have an agreement at the.
They
we're
wouldn't,
paying-
because they're
we're
buying a
paying
different piece before they got to the solar panels.
$495 a plot is what the charge
I
is.
understand.
Now that I'm on the board, I'm gonna hopefully
Raise the
help raise
price.
the price.
There you go.
Because it's very valuable. And we're going out, by the way, there are the Muslims that are there, the Pakistani, and I'm talking with some of the imams from Algeria and the Sudan, and they're looking to probably buy some land there as well.
All right.
So it's gonna be very ecumenical.
Chris?
Send
Chris,
it.
my turn? It's been your turn the whole time, but I just wanted to focus for
I
a
have
second.
two issues. One is the
Okay.
value issue and the appraisal, which from the discussion, I assume we are waiving. The other is that I have not seen any board approval resolution for what's happening here. Those are my only two issues.
Well, the former, we've never gotten appraisals on cell tower leases. We did, in this case, do some admittedly rudimentary market research on to try to find out what similar projects are paying elsewhere. And Monoliths indicated that the going rate in the area now for ground installations, which pay not as well as ones on the on roofs, are about $1,500. I know Tony did a little poking around on the internet and found prices of about $2,000 to $4,000 a year. So that would put us on the low end.
It's actually 1,000 to 3,000 per acre.
Right.
So we're on the low end of that.
Right.
Because this is about an acre and a half, maybe.
Yeah,
two.
it's about an acre and a half, really.
So, yeah, this is at the low end of what I could find.
Right, and they say so it's within the ballpark, whether it's low or high. It's not totally, off. It's not outside a range. On
Right,
the
it's
second
within
piece,
the
you're
range,
out.
okay.
On the second piece, but I'm not saying that we did anything that could even remotely be construed as an appraisal or even evaluation. But at the same time, we haven't been. You guys have not been requiring that for cell tower leases, which I think this is fairly similar to in the basic concept. Just takes up more land. To your other point, that is our bad. We did not draft a board approval, but we can. I don't think we need an.
I
order
mean, the cemetery board.
We did.
Oh,
We did.
sorry.
The last board meeting, we did approve it.
Oh,
Okay. so
We
you-
just have to get you the
So you
minutes.
can get this-
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, we have it. Oh, definitely.
good
So,
point.
Chris, so
Sorry.
yeah, they do have minutes that shows the cemetery's approval of the project, which will obviously require.
In answer to your usual question, the cemetery is compliant in its annual filings. Our last inspection, if you can call it that, we poked around a lot last week. We didn't find it. The crematory was recently inspected and it's fine. And they don't have any outstanding deficits. They do have a PM loan. that they are currently paying back.
So, just to cap it off, the issue about the question would be whether the property was commercially viable for something else. There was, hey, Chris, you may want to consider muting your phone because we can hear the
chair squeak is loud.
Sorry. Because the question would be, well, is there a detriment to tying up your property for 20 years, potentially 30? All right, obviously, let's say 20. What is that potential detriment to the cemetery? And I think the analysis would come about, well, can you rent it as a hotel? Can you sell it? All right, what other uses are there for the land?
I could think of only one thing they could use it for other than this, which would be a cell tower. And then I'd really have concerns about the houses that would be right up against that cell tower.
Yeah, well, I'll ask the cemetery. I mean, can you foresee any other uses for the land that would be consistent with the use of the cemetery? Yeah.
We did, way back in 1974, the park. If you go on Knott Terrace, the city bought Vale Park. And so now it's a very nice park way down at the other end where the city goes through, and I'm on the task force, and we redid it so the kids could be there. And every week we go through and picking up the needles because of what's going on in that whole area.
Yeah,
So no, you cannot sell, but we did sell, I forget how many acres you told me, for the end, so that the Vale district where their homes can go into the park area, and up above is the old Schenectady Museum called My Side now, and they are in the process of bringing paths down into that area that they're going to do for nature walks, but that has nothing to do with the cemetery itself. The cemetery, we can't sell anything other than plots.
Okay.
Within the city park are 9 cemetery areas. We have to maintain it. It includes the Union College faculty cemetery. So it's unique, city park cemetery areas.
Okay.
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the cemetery have any concern about the section of the lease agreement that says that the lessee may sublet the premises in whole or in part without the lessor's consent?
That's where our rider would kick in, correct?
And then the second part of my question is, would the cemetery board have to approve any other use of that property?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes.
I actually have a number of concerns about these.
Yeah, we're going to go through those. All right, so Louis, since you seem to be the keeper of the progress of this, what's our next topic?
If we're done with the financial piece, then Tony's got legal questions, and I didn't want to cut those off.
Oh, yeah. No, sure.
Well, although many of them, I think, would be answered by the modification of our standard cell tower rider, but that may not answer all of them.
All right.
Just probably go through them. You have to.
Let's
And
look
you
at,
can come over to the cemetery, like, seeing it rather than these pictures. You want to see my phone, by the way? So you can tell you what I'm involved, going there and seeing the property. There you go, you got a flip, there you go.
I actually
My kind of guy.
I took a virtual tour. Google Maps has a street view that actually goes up the path.
Into the cemetery?
Yes.
Oh, that's cool. I've never seen
Now,
that
it's
before.
10 years old. The images were taken in 2007. So it's probably not completely accurate with its current condition. But
if you
it
get a
shows
chance, come
pretty
on
much
over.
a straight open field that you
Right.
can see from the road all the way through,
Yeah.
from what I saw on.
What's changed, or the big thing that's changed would be the community garden on the other side.
And the trees.
Trees are grown, obviously.
Big trees.
So I did do a virtual.
Did you get a copy of the cash flow?
all right.
Yeah. I got that.
Tony, you want, I've got concerns and really glad Bob is here, because I'm sure many of them can be addressed, but you want to take us through the lease? Is that where you're going, or
Yeah.
in general?
Well, I highlighted to division a number of issues. And I don't think that they can all be addressed in the addendum that we've always required for cell towers. And plus, that has to be negotiated anyway. Sure. To get started that process. So first is the indemnification. The way I read it, that language only benefits Monolith, it doesn't benefit Vail at all. Because it identifies the parties who are doing and getting indemnification, but then it talks about the indemnification going to the party that uses and possesses the land. That's Monolith. It doesn't talk about indemnification protecting the owner of the land, which is Vail. So that whole paragraph just works to the benefit of Monolith.
Is that something that's in our cell tower letter? I can't remember.
And on top of that,
This is obviously very
on top of that, it states that Monolith is responsible for its gross negligence, which means that by its absence, Vail is responsible for Monolith's ordinary negligence, the way this indemnification clause works. So it's very detrimental to Vail. The other item, I've asked before, and we haven't gotten yet, a description of the easements that would go along with this. They're going to have to move trucks and equipment in and out of the cemetery when they're putting this together. They're going to, I'm sure, want a right of entry and exit to maintain and fix anything during the term of the lease. And without fixed easement language, essentially the lease lets Monolith come in from any point at any time to engage in the construction and to maintain the panels. So it's in Vail's interest to nail down specifically where they can come in and out of, and any other restrictions that are in the interest of the cemetery. And that is actually covered, some of that is covered in the rider. The rider requires them to acknowledge that they have to avoid interfering with funerals and other normal cemetery activity. But we still need easement language that identifies where they're coming in and out of, where they can set up.
I understand that you spoke to Monolith regarding the renewal period?
Oh, making it
Yes.
mutual. Yeah, we had some back and
They
forth on that.
actually, actually what Dan had caught was that the original lease that was presented was for panels on a roof. They revised that and given us a lease for panels that are on the ground. And I think they actually tweaked the language about, that we were just discussing.
The renewal language, the
renewal
automatic
language.
renewal, so that either
Yeah,
side
okay.
can decline to renew.
Right.
That's good.
And then there is the assigned sublet, I think, should just come out.
Well, our general practice on this has been that, correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, it's in that they don't have to come back to us if another solar company takes it over and is operating it in a similar way, or if there's a merger, but anything else.
It should simply require Vail's approval for any
We had this with the Oak
Any
Hill,
assignment of sublet.
we had this with the Oak Hill cell
Now,
tower.
usually you see language that says that consent won't be unreasonably withheld, which should give Monolith some comfort.
Okay, Dan, have you seen this contract?
I don't know
I
if you
haven't
got,
personally.
there's a revised lease that we only got yesterday, so
Okay.
you probably
The
haven't
question,
seen it yet.
it's interesting because there's a farmer that I know of actually. He's from India and he rents from me downstairs. You're gonna say, boy, this is, but they're looking at possibly putting in, and he's on Route 5. They plant corn, he rents it out, but they're looking to use 1 million kilowatt, I believe. And his daughter is an attorney with a law firm right here. And she negotiated with Monolith. Are you interested in calling the Monolith attorney? And are you allowed to, or telling us what we have to do? and we-
With all
Maybe
due
she'd help
respect.
you guys out to do it.
Yeah, listen, this is an application that has been placed in front of the board, where the cemetery, of course, we're gonna, and I'm fully, I asked you the questions about the potential sales, you know, we defer, I'm gonna defer to your business judgment,
Right.
all right? At least I think the board will, all right? In terms of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for the cemetery. However, you haven't seen the appropriate lease, right? You don't
I
know what
haven't
the
seen
language
it myself,
says.
I'm not an attorney, so
I understand
we'll
that.
give it to our attorney.
But, you know, the division and the board can't interpose its judgment for yours, you're gonna have to take a look at these issues. And we're pointing out the issues, all right? And some of the issues may be, after you understand the fully stop-go issues. I don't know that, all right? So, to hear us, we'll be happy to help, we'll be happy to advise, but we can't negotiate it.
Well, Tony, are you able to put that in writing or check off where you think it should be? And then we'll go from there.
Monmouth is hearing us right now.
Yeah, right.
If you had corporation counsel, it would be even better.
Generally,
Oh,
where
yeah?
the board,
Oh,
okay,
cool.
then there's
Now,
a
that's
corp
wonderful.
there. Okay.
no,
Okay.
no, that's monolith.
I know.
But if they're willing to change and.
Well, yeah.
You need your.
Generally, when the board is happy with the deal, the specific,
You have to have somebody look out for your
specifics
interests.
of a legal document have been worked out. You guys have been comfortable approving it, subject to council's satisfactory review of the legal documents. I'm not sure you guys are at that point yet. I'm just saying if you could get to that point, you could be there.
And the other thing to add is, I wouldn't want to be in direct negotiation with Monolith's attorney. Normally, the cemetery has an attorney that works things out with the cell tower company, the solar panel company, and the cemetery's attorney comes to me and says, this is what we put together. Take a look.
For our,
Were you able to take notes what he was saying?
What we can do.
I'm doing it.
So I've done an email to division highlighting these points.
Right.
Since we've already discussed in open session, I think we've kind of waived confidentiality of that email.
That's all right, because we don't want to come.
No, but I think you're hitting on
This is
things that may
information
not
for
be in there,
everybody.
So
so.
if you could forward that email.
Yeah, if anything needs to be redacted, we'll redact it, but I think that we could probably share the overall of that email.
That makes
I mean,
sense.
it's very general, so this isn't really substantial.
Waivable
I mean,
on-
but was there anything else, Tony, was there anything else that was significant enough that you really want to flag it while we're sitting
I
here?
think we hit them all. And I just want to do circle back. Since a major renovation application does require a finding that it doesn't interfere with lots, it doesn't impact adversely the community, I do want the board to address those before
Yep.
it votes.
Not just before it votes, but I think, well, what would you like?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this. Our columbarium regs require posting. And it seems to me that posting before approval would be beneficial here. I know that the cemetery feels strongly that this isn't going to have an adverse impact, and it may be that your existing customers or potential customers have a green view of society, and we'll be happy to see solar panels in this area. It also may be that some may object. It'd be nice to know that. And it'd also be nice to know that the neighbors, and which in my view includes St. John's Cemetery. I can understand why others might not include St. John's Cemetery, but neighbors should be able to weigh in here, because that is one of our required analysis.
Let me ask Monolith a question. Folks, hi. Time is a factor in this, is that not correct?
Big time factor.
Okay, so tell me what the time parameters are and why.
If this site is not commissioned, so activated by end of 2017, it's really going to be a no-go for us. The reason being the net metering policy with the Department of Public Service is changing at the beginning of 2018. So it just won't be cost effective for us for this project.
All right, so when you say commit, what does that mean? At what point do you have to have the contract executed and finalized?
Really, I would say second week of November, so end of next week. Yeah.
How long is it gonna take you to get your municipal approvals?
Pretty quick, I would say tops, week and a half, 2 weeks.
Because if the board is comfortable with this, conditioned on things happening afterwards, I suppose you could go to the municipality while council's reviewing the lease. But if we're gonna have a posting requirement, I mean, people, well, look.
Hey, Louis, you know, let's have some board discussion before we go there, all right?
Well, we are actually coming up on a frequent visiting day for the cemetery, Veterans Day. So it's not crazy to say that if we put up signs tomorrow, you'd actually catch a fair sample of people.
Not a bad suggestion.
There's another, maybe another way to deal with this. From what was presented, we've been told that Monolith doesn't want to spend the money on doing its applications until it knows it has a lease. Another way to handle this is that the cemetery signs the lease, but there's a condition that it requires cemetery board approval. And if that doesn't happen today, you still have a signed lease that would come back to the board, and in the meantime, you can get your approvals if you're willing to go that step.
But wait, does that mean that the board would then have to?
You would have to come back to the board for their approval. Well, one of the conditions in the lease that Vail can sign is it requires cemetery board approval, or the lease is void.
Or it could fulfill a contingency. If in fact, tell you what, before I get there,
Okay.
let's open it up for discussion
Chris,
with
unmute.
the board. Chris, unmute.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know how to mute it anyways.
But you've been so quiet. Oh my gosh.
He oiled the chair when we weren't looking.
All right, so we've got a lot of balls in the air on this one, guys, but any further questions or discussion, suggestions?
No, all I want is that board resolution.
Okay, nice and simple.
All I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth.
I'm particularly concerned myself just about community awareness of this. I too, by the way, my own perspective, don't think that this would be a difficult issue for the community, but it concerns me that it is, one, the first of its kind in at least cemetery use, and two, in New York State, that I know of, and two, that it does abut, notwithstanding the community garden and all that, it does abut residential areas, as much as Vail does. And so I'd like to see some outreach, I'd like to know, and that is part of the major renovation application. That's one of the things that the cemetery, when it makes a presentation to us, should be able to address. So, but before I propose what I think the remedy to that is, sense of the board, I get your sense, Chris, that you don't have a problem with the installation.
Right. I like Tony's proposal of approving condition upon.
Okay?
I think this will set a precedent, because it is the first time that we're dealing with this, and I'm thinking that the division should come up with some guidance, as we had with cell towers. Is there anything that, I mean, not necessarily right now, but at some point in the very near future, because we're gonna look at this case and say, well, you approved it for them, you gotta approve it for the following group of.
I don't believe in precedent.
Well, to the extent you're talking about having written standards, standardizing how we deal with these things, we need that for like everything, not just this. We're deficient in that in general, and it's something we're working on already. So yes, that's a point very well taken.
And the second thing I'd like to know is that council is happy with every provisions.
Right.
And if I have that, I'm good to go.
Okay, so that so the sense is, and I just want to be clear, the sense is that the project itself as presented is okay, but we have the ancillary issues, which are extraordinarily important, by the way, which is impact on the community, on the lot holders, potential impact, as well as the legal ramifications that were articulated by council. All right, those are the things that we're concerned about. So with that in mind, any other talk? Cemetery, you're welcome to comment before I put a motion.
As far as St. John's goes, I think we get a hold of them very quickly and ask to get their input. And, you know, again, if they're negative for some reason, then I guess we don't go forward with it. I don't think they're gonna be negative. The one plot that I know of, there's living people there, we can get a letter from them. If you need it also from the synagogue, because now we're in the process of buying it, that we can also do. The homes I do is when, I think happens when the city goes out, they usually send letters to everybody around there saying, there's gonna be a hearing, are you interested, or write something down, and that will take whatever time.
But that's different. You see, that's different. There's two different obligations there. That's on their code enforcement issue. Maybe you're right, Mark. Maybe
It's that zoning,
it's not zoning? Because
You don't
you don't go to a meeting.
you don't go to meeting for building code. You may need a waiver, but you don't
Yeah.
apply the state for a
Right.
waiver.
So what
If we
approval is
needed a
this?
variance, we would have to.
If you need a variance.
Yeah, but if you don't need a variance, then
Right.
there would be no notice.
And it's also a different issue in that we're supposed to know before we make this decision. All
Okay,
right, we're
I-
supposed to have some input. You have a suggestion as to how to accomplish that?
No, I think I want to hear where you're going with this before I object.
Okay, good. You're not
But
gonna
I
get a
think I'm
chance.
going to object.
Not gonna let you. What do you think you can do to reach out to the surrounding residential
I would
property
assume it
owners?
would only be most of the homes that butt up on the cemetery. In my copious spare time at 75 years old, I think we can develop a letter and frankly knock on doors as if we're running for office. Thank God we're not. And ask them, here's what we're doing, have a picture to get this moving along. I think we have enough people. I think we're talking about maybe 10 homes, I don't know how many homes. that actually- And we'll go there, knock on the doors, have them fill it out. If they say, they're worried about it, then we'll get back with you with actually what they say. Because we don't want our neighbors suddenly, when it goes up, suddenly say,
Right.
what's going on here?
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
So,
Louis, you're chomping at the bit, so I'm gonna let you.
I have a problem with this whole angle here. I have a big problem with it. Let me rephrase this. If the cemetery wants to do this, then I think it's actually a great idea for them to do it on their own initiative because they want to have happy neighbors and they want to have good relationships with their neighbors. So that's great. But, hold on. But you guys as a board, to my knowledge, have never required canvassing the neighborhood for a cell tower application. You've never required it for a major renovation application. You've never required it for pretty much any other application other than, and even for crematories, even for crematories, even for columbarium, even for mausolea, the posting is really directed at the lot owners. We have always, at least this is my understanding, relied on whatever local approvals are in place to take care of the localities. The only exception that I can think of in the last 4 years was the cell tower at Oak Hill Cemetery in Nyack. And there, Paul had a concern that being close to the hospital, there might be something that specially interfered with sensitive machinery. It turns out the hospital actually has cell panels on its roof. And even that we resolved by ensuring that they would let the hospital know of the local planning process as opposed to having our requirement. And while in this case, it's actually pretty easy to get a hold of the homeowners and the cemetery seems amenable to doing it, so fine. How do you define local? Should we also be canvassing the homes on the other side of Brandywine Avenue? How about the people up the block who might see it as they drive by? What about in the next project? Let's say that the panels are up on a hill, the whole neighborhood can see them. I attended, just for the sake of making sure there was no misinformation, on the state process, the hearings of the White Plains zoning board on the White Plains Rural Cemetery's proposal to do a crematory. They had 250 neighbors in there coming in with all sorts of issues with it, and the zoning board heard it and took that stuff into account. I don't want us to be doing that.
And if there's
too.
been a zoning board involved in this, that would have been great. There's not. All
Right, but
Now,
there isn't.
hold on. The major renovation regulations require an analysis of both lot holder and community, adverse effects on the community, all right? It's the cemetery's obligation to provide us with some comfort that there won't be, all right? In this application, we have none, number one. Number two, when cell towers came in, when you weren't here, we had great concern about the local communities, and we did require folks to go out. We did get information on it. This is the first of
But
its
did
kind.
we actually canvass
This is the
houses?
first of its kind, all right? And I have nothing. The board has nothing upon which to gauge community reaction, all right? And I think we ought to have it, all right? So.
And then we have, there's
it
another.
doesn't mean that as time goes on, we have to get this kind of thing every time, all right? But you seem to be arguing that, we're gonna do it, how do you limit it? No. I have property owners directly abutting this installation, all right? It would make sense for the cemetery to find out whether there's objections. If there are objections, are there objections commonsensical or not, all right? But the board should know.
We had people across the street from Flushing Cemetery when it built this
Okay.
mausoleum. We
Louis,
didn't canvass
Louis?
those houses.
This is the first time I want to know.
Then the other issue is, who are we canvassing? What makes you think all of those homes are owner occupied?
I'm going to make a motion. So, I would motion to approve based on, with the following contingencies. First, that the legal issues raised by council are addressed to council satisfaction. Two, that the cemetery provide notice of the project to its lot holders and those property owners immediately abutting the project. That posting to the lot holders could be done on before Veterans Day. That would be wonderful. I will, notwithstanding Lewis's objections, I will ask that other notification be done to the satisfaction of the division. For real.
I'll be here. I'll be here.
All right. Any discussion on the motion?
You gonna get a board resolution?
Oh, thank you. Third contingency is
The board will send you the minutes.
Resolution or minutes, correct, Chris?
Yeah.
Well, whatever
Yeah.
document approves it. But I know who was there, whether there was a quorum, and what the vote was.
100%. So amended. All right. Anything else before I terminate this controversial discussion?
And let me get, none of this requires us to come back to you unless
The
get
contingencies are met.
something
Right.
that
That's
requires us
correct.
to, okay.
That's correct.
If they receive some negative comments,
And we will decide what the system.
Well, if they series.
We will let you know.
You'll let us know,
We
and then
will-
we'll
we-
talk to you.
we have no
Charlie,
problem
and-
working with
and
this
we'll see
board.
where we gotta go back now.
It's fine.
Depends
All
where we
right.
are.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
I think there's still some work to do, and I don't know if you've seen Appendix A yet from
The
us.
rider, you have the rider, right?
You have the rider?
I just received it, I think, either this morning or yesterday.
Okay.
So I will send you, in addition to what you've heard today, the list of council's concerns. I'll do it before 1:30 today.
And notwithstanding my speech about not representing the cemetery, obviously, our council will be available to chat with you if you have anything to do so. All
We
right,
do have one more thing on this, should be
I know we
shorter.
do.
You
Thank you
guys
very
get
much.
out of here.
All right,
We thank you for your
leave while the
time.
going is good,
We want
guys.
to work closely with you. Again, if we're going to be your guinea pigs. And by the way, the question that you may have about bearing pets now that you approve cemeteries or the state did, if you want to know from, again, a kosher point, I asked the head of the BOD, Rabbi Bomser locally, because you can now bury, I said, what if you bury your pets? He said, first of all, if they're companions, why wouldn't you? I said, what if I have a pot-bellied pig? And you know what his answer was? They're cremated.
They're cremated.
They're inorganic, it's
Right.
fine. So if that question ever comes up,
I will make a
at
note.
least from the Orthodox,
I will make a note.
Well, I asked the rabbi the same question.
by the way, I want to know all the different boards,
Thanks very much.
You gotta represent yourself.
including the Jewish Federation. I've dealt with all the rabbis.
Can we get this to
Thank you,
Lynn?
Reed.
Two? Yes,
You wanted to, about evangelism.
But no, because you're protecting us, we want to do that.
That's,
I don't know if our attorney looked at it.
Yeah, you really got it.
well, your attorney didn't look at the new news because we just got it yesterday afternoon.
And we're having a meeting that they're gonna approve the buying for 8th Avenue, so, thank you, gentlemen.
Okay,
And
take
ladies.
care.
Thank you.
Hey, it's good to see you again.
Take care.
I don't think I have any grains left for this next one.
What's that?
Williams before. But I think I'm stuck presenting it.
Shouldn't be long, go for it.
Can I just let the cemetery do this?
Oh, sure. Where are they?
Dave?
right here.
Oh, this is yours?
It is.
What kind of horrible application is this?
Here's some
Well.
additional numbers we got today. I need one more for Johnny.
Please identify yourself for the record.
Sure, David Fleming,
from the Featherstone firm representing the Buffalo City Cemetery. May I approach?
You may, indeed.
I have a hard time hearing you guys.
How about I try to listen?
It's a fairly straightforward project. Actually, the municipality approached the cemetery due to the interesting architectural style of the storage shed on the building, on the property, which is right on the street, as you can see from some of the photographs.
The style is technically known as ugly as sin, right?
It's just a cinder block building, and had approached the cemetery about possibly converting that space into burial space, because there is a real desire in Williamsville to have the side-by-side burials. So the cemetery looked at it and determined that they could get 85 single graves at a base price of $8,500 a piece. With the interment fees, the foundation fees, et cetera, their potential revenue estimate is $880,000 plus. For a project that is expected to cost approximately $33,479.
Over what period of time was the return of it?
It was based on full build out of the project.
Like 50 years?
How long?
100, 50?
No, I think, the problem, so if I could just back up a second on the explanation of what Williamsville is. This is a cemetery taken over by Forest Lawn.
Right.
And they are now out of burial space. So we don't have.
Totally out.
They're out these types of graves.
Okay.
They've been out for a while.
As abandoned cemetery, I believe.
I think it was before the statute allowing for abandonment funds. Forest Lawn has kind of merged with a bunch of other cemeteries in Erie County.
Yeah.
So
All right.
I think
Yep.
the problem here is that there is the revenue streams are basically drying up for the cemetery. The municipality approached the cemetery and asked them to do this, and in fact has held their review and concluded it and provided a demolition permit, as well as the Historic Preservation Council Commission has provided approval of the project.
The cemetery has local designation, right?
Yes.
That's why they're involved?
Yes, and it's in the district, so they have approved of the project. I think there is a significant benefit, not just to the lot owners from a financial perspective, but I think that the building is less than desirable, and will, because of its location, I think is going to help the sales of the cemetery, because it really is right on the main street like that with the cinder block building. It's lovely wooden fencing. It's going to be, now it's going to be opened up into a grave area. The maintenance building is not really a maintenance building anymore, because Forest Lawn is maintaining the cemetery, and other equipment is off-site, so there's no need for the actual maintenance building. And to the public health and safety issues, asbestos and other tests were done on the site. There is nothing at the site that is a danger. It's a standard demolition of a cinder block building. Stationing will be obviously in the parking lot of the for the building. There's ample turnaround space and access for folks visiting, and it'll be a very short time.
So Dan, since you're looking confused, let me explain what you're looking at.
I was just at the 69.9 that the land sales are grave sales? Is that what that is?
I'm not sure what you're looking for.
We just got this from Williamsville, happy to share. It's, we had asked them to try, Forest Lawn now, Williamsville is part of Forest Lawn, so the
Right.
financial you got before the meeting is for all of Forest Lawn. And so the tours you were asking about, Tony, those are the historic tours that they do at Forest Lawn.
Yeah, there's actually the.
And all of that, those kind of activities but all of that is consolidated. We asked them to try to break out what Williamsville itself looks like.
Yep.
This is their attempt
So
at
they
it,
did
but this
2
is
years.
kind of,
There's the front and the back. So there's 16, 17.
Oh, I see.
but it's not gonna be like real,
But they're-
satisfactory to auditors precisely
No, I
because it doesn't really exist.
But they have a pretty robust sale of graves. right?
Yes,
At
they do.
69,
They have a
90.
very significant program on marketing. I think they do a pretty good job. This is a cemetery, really, which is meeting a particular community's needs. I think that's why this is so important.
Yeah.
Forest Lawn. I think there is also so the board's aware there is a time frame constraint, just because the winter costs are expected to escalate the price.
There's actually an escalator in the
There is.
contract, isn't there?
That's what.
Well, that's November 1st. deadline, so the cost of the project would be $42.9 at this point.
Well, at this point, if they have received their demolition permit, they have received authorization from the Historic District Commission, and they have all necessary local approvals, they can proceed immediately, and the contractor is willing to proceed immediately.
And waive the escalation.
And waive the escalation, if they can start literally, by next week. I think they'd start tomorrow.
Nothing like pressure.
Well, and to Mr. Wiles' point, there was a resolution which authorized the demolition of the project, and the minutes clearly outline the board members who were present in that.
Great. We have that? Or?
I can give it to you.
I've seen the resolution.
Oh, you got it? It was in the package? Okay, great.
And to answer your question, Forest Lawn, their inspection was clean, they are in compliance, they're current in their annual reporting, and I don't recall with 100% certainty, but I'm pretty sure I discussed with them compliance with the Revitalization Act, and that they have amended their bylaws and practices to conform to that already. I don't have their actual conflict of interest statements on this one. I'm saying that because this is a big enough cemetery that we ordinarily would ask those things of it.
Now, can you break out or tell me the board compensation issue?
That I do not have with me.
Do you have that?
It's
one?
not. No. I'd be happy,
Can you
just
do
like
the
we're
same?
working on with Pine Lawn, to get a report on that. I don't. Some of the things that we had with Pine Lawn that seemed unusual to you, I'm pretty sure are not present here, but we can do a workup on that pretty easily.
All right.
So Dave has answered my question about the project itself, which is whether there was asbestos or other hazardous material. But on the financials, we don't have a breakdown of their expenses. There's no breakdown of officer salary, wages for the hourlies, insurance, utilities, pension, retirement. It's just, we got both numbers and with no breakdowns, and that doesn't help us.
I spoke to the internal accountant at Forest Lawn. Again, as Louis was saying, these are consolidated numbers for the 4 different locations that they operate. If we wanted breakdowns, which she provided for Williamsville.
No, I'm not looking for a breakdown.
No, he's looking for a breakdown on the management and general administration line.
There's one entity,
yeah.
right, Forest Lawn,
Right.
that operates,
4
it's
locations.
the only, but
More.
Fine.
this is Forest Lawn's
Right.
income statement.
Right.
So we should see individual categories.
I mean, just as a word of explanation, I think you guys all know this, but we take these categories as they're presented in the cemetery's financial statements. So they're going to look different for each one, and I'm guessing, not having read all their financial statements myself, that they lump it all under a management and general administration category. I agree that it would be nice to see how much of that is grounds people, how much of that is officers and directors, how much of that is executives, how much of that is overhead. I am sure we can develop something that reports back on that. It won't necessarily be like, this isn't like we're numbers missing because we missed something on what was reported, like I had in Nassau Knolls, and I was able to fill it in 15 minutes before the board meeting. This will take a bit of work, but we certainly could report back on.
Well, that's more in line
Compensation
with,
structure.
you don't normally see it broken down to a degree, but we normally get a breakdown, which we haven't got, but,
Yeah, this is less
Chet?
broken down than I would
yeah.
like.
Chet, you have had occasion to look at Forest Lawn's numbers recently?
I don't know when we audited it last.
Not recently, this is actually handled by one of the other accountants, but Forest Lawn, financially and operationally, to me, is run as a premier cemetery. I'm not aware of any outstanding issue, be it operational or financial. So,
When you do your due diligence in response to Chris's questions, which, by the way, we're going to be developing, just so folks know,
Right.
a general format so that these questions can be answered up front in the division's review of the application, so that we don't have to do it individually for different
and we have a
cemeteries.
template.
It's not meant to be, there's no not meant to raise suspicion something's wrong, it's just something that we want to have before the
For the
board.
larger
so we know-
cemetery, right, for the larger cemeteries, we really want to get a sense of top-level compensation and.
I wanted that made
structure.
clear because,
Well said, yeah.
you know, last month it had nothing to do with individual cemetery.
I mean, obviously, it's gonna be irrelevant for most of the smaller cemeteries where the
Absolutely.
officers and directors aren't compensated at all.
But what I would ask, in light of the fact that we don't have numbers usually of this time, and I understand you're saying that Forest Lawn is your cemetery, and no reason to believe otherwise, but when you do your review, please review the numbers for Forest Lawn. If there's an issue, bring it back to the board,
Absolutely.
all right? All right, any discussion on this application, in this
No, I think
project?
I think this is fine, and the question of compensation is really independent of the approval of this, of the application.
Right? Reading? All right, motion to approve, you wanna do it? Oh, okay, motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Rock and roll.
You've already set your next meeting, so I think you can just adjourn.
Yeah, we
I love moving to, hey, you wanna move to adjourn, Chris? It's so much fun.
I will move to adjourn.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The rest of us allowed to say aye too?
Yeah.
And Tony, I literally need 3 minutes. And
3 minutes is all you
I
get.
gotta turn off, I literally need 3 minutes of your time when these guys are out of here. How do I turn this thing off?